Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
He sold my laptop for $300 and told me to chill. My mom said he didn't mean harm. I just nodded, smiled, and waited. 2 weeks later, the cops showed up at his job. Turns out my brother didn't know the serial number was registered in my name and flagged as stolen. It happened on a Saturday that had no business being memorable. I had just gotten back from the grocery store with an armful of reusable bags and a sore shoulder from carrying a watermelon that, looking back, symbolized all the useless weight I'd been carrying around that year. I kicked off my shoes, dumped the bags on the kitchen counter, and made my way upstairs to my room, expecting to finish up a client project that was due Monday. I remember thinking how good it would feel to knock it out early and maybe even have time to apply to some new gigs. I had been freelancing as a graphic designer for over 5 years at that point, and even though it wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills and gave me something close to peace. But the moment I stepped into my room, something felt wrong, not ransacked or chaotic, just off. My desk looked too clean, too empty. I walked closer and froze. My laptop, my silver 16-inch MacBook Pro that I had customized with stickers from every freelance project I'd ever been proud of, was gone. At first, I blinked and told myself it must have been moved. Maybe I'd taken it downstairs the night before. Maybe I'd absent-mindedly placed it somewhere else. But the longer I stood there, scanning my shelves and dresser, the colder the pit in my stomach grew. I walked back down, holding my breath without meaning to, and found my younger brother Trey lounging on the couch in the living room, one sock halfway off, eating the last of the cereal straight from the box like some kind of oversized child. He was 29, still lived at home, always had a new hustle, crypto, flipping sneakers, selling mentorship calls to people dumber than him. He didn't look up when I said his name the first time, only when I walked over and asked directly, "Have you seen my laptop?" Did he glance at me with the kind of grin that should have come with a warning label. "Oh," he said, like it had just occurred to him. "Yeah, I sold it, got like 300 for it." I stared at him, genuinely not understanding the words. I waited for him to laugh, to say, "Just kidding," to admit it was some elaborate prank, but he didn't. He just went back to chewing like we were talking about the weather. "You sold my laptop?" I said slowly, carefully, like maybe I'd misunderstood him. He finally put the cereal down and looked at me like I was overreacting. "Relax, you'll get another one. That thing was old anyway. You should be thanking me." There's a kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room. It presses down on your chest, turns your blood into something heavy. I couldn't speak for a full 10 seconds. I felt my face flush, my ears burning, and when I finally found the words, all I could manage was, "Why would you think that's okay?" He shrugged like it was nothing. "I needed the cash. I'll pay you back when I hit with this next NFT drop, probably by next week." That was when our mom, Darlene, chimed in from the kitchen. She hadn't even looked up from peeling potatoes. "Lisa, he didn't mean harm. He's just trying to get his business going. It's not worth fighting over." Not worth fighting over. I couldn't believe it. This was the same woman who once grounded me for 2 weeks in high school for lending my cousin a sweater without asking. But her precious son steals my $1,000 laptop, and suddenly it's a family moment of forgiveness and understanding. I tried to explain that the laptop wasn't just a laptop. It was my work, my clients, my contracts, my tax records, my whole damn life. But it was like trying to scream through a pane of glass. They weren't hearing me. Trey had already started talking about how he was going to use the money to get in on some exclusive Discord server that was launching a new altcoin. And my mom was talking about dinner. So I did what I've learned to do best in this house. I swallowed it. On the outside, I piled. I said, "Okay." I acted like I'd let it go, but on the inside, something was changing, not snapping, not breaking, just hardening. That night, while everyone was watching a rerun of some reality show in the living room, I went into the kitchen and pulled out my old iPad. I logged into my Apple ID more out of habit than anything and clicked on Find My Device. I wasn't expecting it to work. Trey was too dumb to be dangerous, but I figured even he would have known to wipe the laptop. But there it was, online, active, showing up somewhere 15 miles away, in a town I'd never even been to. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart thudding. Then I clicked into the settings and took a screenshot of the device info, including the serial number and location. That's when I realized something. He hadn't just sold my laptop. He had handed me every single thread I'd need to unravel his entire life. And he had no idea. So I took another screenshot, then another. I uploaded them all to a folder I called Insurance. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't even ask for an apology, because I wasn't interested in his apology. I was interested in the long game, and he'd already made the first move. I think there comes a moment in every adult's life when you realize the people who raised you, the ones who shaped your childhood and drilled values into your head like bedtime commandments, are not infallible heroes or wise sages. They're just people, flawed and stubborn, and often blind in the ways that matter most. For me, that moment happened in the days immediately following the betrayal, not the theft itself, that was already bad enough, but the days afterward, when no one in the house acted like anything had actually happened. My brother strolled around like he was some kind of venture capitalist and not a grown man who had pawned off his sister's livelihood for a gamble on internet money. And my mother, who had once slapped a cordless phone out of my hand for raising my voice to my father during a family argument, was now acting like I'd simply lost a pair of earbuds and should be over it by dinner. By the third day, when Trey cracked a joke at the kitchen table about how he upgraded me by freeing me from my boomer laptop, something inside me shifted so subtly, so calmly, it scared even me. I didn't yell, I didn't slam any doors, I just stood up from the table, washed my plate, and walked upstairs without saying a word. That was the night I called Maya. Maya and I had known each other since community college. She'd always been the one who knew her way around rules, not just legal ones, but the quiet systems that people pretend don't exist. How to get extensions without begging, how to get your deposit back from a landlord who swore you scuffed the floor, how to play dumb in front of the right people and play smart in front of the rest. By now, she was working at a small but sharp legal firm that handled everything from landlord disputes to tech contract reviews. And when I told her what happened, she didn't gasp or overreact. She just asked, "Did you have the serial number written down anywhere?" I told her I had it through iCloud, verified with screenshots, that it was showing up in a business park 15 miles away, that I had login confirmation, proof of registration, and bank transactions that could place the machine in my possession for the last 3 years. She was quiet for a second before asking, in a tone that was too calm to be casual, "And he really admitted it to you directly?" "He said it like I should be grateful," I replied, trying not to let my voice shake from the weight of how insane it all felt when said out loud. "Like he did me a favor." "That's theft," she said simply, straight up. "You could file right now and have him picked up before lunch tomorrow." But I didn't want that. Not yet. I told her I needed time. I wasn't after a quick hit of justice or a dramatic showdown. What I wanted was something cleaner, colder, more surgical. The kind of revenge you don't feel until weeks later when everything seems fine, and suddenly the ceiling caves in. Over the next week, I built my case the way I build projects for clients, meticulous, layered, and quiet. I went back through every photo I'd ever posted with the laptop visible, organized receipts from the original purchase and repair visits, and exported every client agreement that had passed through that machine. I cross-referenced dates with bank statements, forwarded backups to a new cloud account, and made a digital timeline so crisp it would hold up in court without question. What surprised me most wasn't how easy it was to piece together. It was how much effort Trey hadn't made to cover his tracks. The Facebook Marketplace post was still live. He had used his real name, linked to his real profile, and included a selfie holding the cash with the caption, "Gotta love easy money, no shame, no awareness, just ego." He had sold it to a man named Corey, who worked at some kind of logistics firm and who was now the unfortunate host of my stolen property. I found Corey's LinkedIn, his company profile, and even his employee ID from a tagged photo someone had posted of their amazing warehouse crew. All it took was one weekend, a pot of coffee, and the sheer rage that only family betrayal can give you. And just like that, the puzzle was nearly complete. The best part? Trey still had no idea I was even angry. I had smiled at his jokes, nodded at his crypto monologues, and even asked, sweetly, how his side hustles were going. I played the role of the forgiving sister, the one who'd moved on, the one who was too mature to start a fight over something as petty as electronics. And every time he talked down to me, every time he winked and told me to trust the process, I felt something in my chest tighten with satisfaction because he was still playing checkers, and I had already drafted the rule book for chess. A few nights later, he brought home fast food and tossed a bag my way like we were best buds. "Figured you needed a pick-me-up," he said with that infuriating smirk. I thanked him. I smiled. And that night, I went a step further. I used a recovery tool to access my old password vault. It was still backed up through iCloud, and buried in there, under dozens of credentials I'd long forgotten, was one particular login I didn't expect to see: his crypto wallet. He'd set it up on my machine a year ago when he didn't have his own computer yet, and like an idiot, never changed the settings. Now, I didn't touch anything. I'm not a thief. But I did take screenshots, lots of them. Transactions, usernames, platform IDs, suspiciously large transfers to multiple accounts that didn't have his name on them. I uploaded everything to a hidden Google Drive folder, one only Maya had access to, and named it Backup Evidence, Family Matters. By the end of that week, I had built something better than a case. I had built a trigger. One click, one email, one message to the right channel, and Trey's entire illusion would shatter like glass under pressure. But I wasn't quite ready to pull it. Not yet. Because as satisfying as it would have been to ruin him right then and there, I wanted him to feel safe first. I wanted him to relax, to think he'd gotten away with it. I wanted him to believe that I was weak enough to forgive and forget. Because when the hammer finally drops, the fall hurts more if you never saw it coming. And Trey, he was still floating on clouds. He didn't even notice the ground was already gone. The strangest thing about anger, real anger, the kind that doesn't shout or swing or throw, is that it doesn't come with heat, not after a while. It comes with cold, precise, almost surgical clarity, the kind that sharpens your instincts instead of dulling them, the kind that settles in your bones and makes everything you do feel methodical and necessary, rather than impulsive or emotional. That's what I carried in my chest every day after I decided not to scream, not to plead, not to beg for an apology. That was never going to come. Instead, I began wearing a smile so practiced, so convincing, that even I forgot it was fake some days, until my jaw would ache from the effort, and I'd catch myself rubbing the tension out of my face in the bathroom mirror like I was trying to erase who I was becoming. Trey had no clue, none. He thought it had blown over, he thought I was fine. Maybe he genuinely believed his own version of the story, that I was being dramatic, that it was just a laptop, that we were family and therefore bound to eventually forget the whole thing and go back to whatever dysfunctional brand of closeness we had before. He moved through the house like a man unbothered, laughing louder, talking more, constantly filling space with that entrepreneurial nonsense that he used like armor against any acknowledgement of failure or wrongdoing. He talked about getting into vending machines next, said he wanted to start a passive income empire that would make him a millionaire before he turned 30, which, for the record, was 4 months away, and already laughing at him behind his back. I listened, nodded, even asked questions like I cared. All while quietly pulling more and more thread from the fabric of his life. Every evening, after pretending to be too tired to work, I'd sit in bed with my tablet and sift through his online presence like a forensic hobbyist, backtracking business names, reading the fine print on his PayPal disputes, digging into message board comments he'd left under aliases he clearly thought were untraceable. I wasn't looking for one big smoking gun. I was collecting patterns, behavior, leverage. One night, I stumbled on something even I wasn't expecting. Buried in a forgotten download folder from my old iCloud backup was a series of invoices from a consulting group Trey had set up using a template I designed for him years ago when he begged me to make his side hustle look more professional. He'd never told me what he used it for, and I didn't think to ask at the time. But now, looking at the document history, I saw that he had reused it multiple times. Each invoice billed to a different client, each for the same vague service: digital strategy and crypto portfolio alignment. What jumped out, though, wasn't the wording, it was the amounts. Always just under the limit that would trigger identity verification with the payment processor. Always billed to accounts that, when I Googled them, didn't seem to be tied to real people. It was sloppy, it was shady, and it smelled a lot like amateur fraud. I forwarded the files to Maya, asking her opinion without revealing too much. She wrote back within the hour, more direct than usual. If he's using false identities or unregistered consulting services, that's more than theft. That's criminal misrepresentation, maybe even wire fraud depending on where the clients are. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling that familiar chill wrap tighter around my spine. Not because I was afraid of what this meant, but because I was realizing, truly realizing, that the person I had once defended to every teacher, every friend, every date who gave me that skeptical look when they met him, might actually be a criminal, not just in the moral sense, but in the very real, prosecutable way that you read about in the second half of local news stories after the word charged. And still, the house buzzed with normalcy. My mother made her Sunday roast and hummed to herself while slicing potatoes, talking about church as if nothing had shifted, as if we were all just living in the same world. Trey, emboldened by my silence, started talking about moving out soon, said he was finally about to make real money, and didn't want to be held back by other people's energy. He said it like it was a dig at me, and maybe it was, or maybe he just couldn't help himself. He never had the awareness to read a room unless the room was clapping for him. Then came the moment that made it all real. I had been tracking the laptop's movements via iCloud every few days, just to make sure it hadn't gone completely dark, when I noticed it ping in a new location, inside a commercial building registered to a logistics company, the same one I'd traced Corey to, the man who had unknowingly bought the stolen laptop from my brother. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Maybe someone just passed through with it on them, but then I dug deeper. I used an old tracking site that picks up on shared Wi-Fi logins, and sure enough, the laptop was connected to the warehouse's internal network. It hadn't just passed through, it was in active use. That meant whoever was on it hadn't wiped it properly, and that meant the system still recognized my credentials as the owner. I clicked into the access logs, heart racing like I was committing a crime myself, and saw something that froze me in place. Someone had recently tried to access my client folder, the one labeled Contracts and Tax Documents. They hadn't succeeded, it was encrypted. But just the attempt meant someone was snooping. This was no longer just about Trey being careless. This was now about liability. If any of my client's data was breached because of his stupidity, it could cost me everything. I could be blacklisted, sued, held accountable for something I had nothing to do with. And suddenly, the idea of patience felt a lot less noble and a lot more dangerous. I sent a text to Maya that night, one sentence: "I'm ready." She didn't ask what that meant, she just said, "Send me everything." As I packaged up the evidence, the screenshots, the correspondence, the Facebook post, the serial number confirmations, the GPS pings, I didn't feel angry or vindicated or even nervous. I felt nothing, just cold, just quiet. And when Trey walked into the kitchen that night, boasting about his new NFT investment and how he might just quit his job if it pops, I smiled again. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes, doesn't even bother pretending anymore. Because by that point, smiling didn't mean I was okay. It meant I was done waiting, There's a kind of silence that settles in right before something breaks. Not a loud crash or an explosive snap, but a soft, almost reverent stillness, the sort that creeps in just before the impact, like the air knows what's coming and wants to hold its breath in anticipation. That's what the house felt like the morning I sent in the report. Not different, not obviously tense, but just quiet. My mother was in the kitchen, humming something from the 80s as she prepped her garden vegetables for the freezer, while Trey was upstairs, talking way too loudly on the phone to someone he called his business partner, discussing liquidity plans and asset rotations, with a confidence that made me wonder if he even knew what those words meant, or if he just liked the way they sounded rolling off his tongue. And me? I was in my room, sitting at my desk with my phone in one hand and a lukewarm cup of tea in the other, staring at the email draft that had taken me a week to finalize, even though I could have written it in 20 minutes if I had let myself be impulsive. The wording had to be perfect. Not emotional, not angry, just factual, clinical, thorough in the kind of way that makes a person reading it pause and realize this wasn't written by someone venting. They were looking at something carefully built. I included everything: screenshots of the Facebook post, the marketplace sale listing, the selfie with the cash, the serial number and AppleCare registration in my name, the GPS logs showing the machine in active use, the backup data folders, the invoice trail, and the crypto wallet evidence, all tied together in a concise but quietly devastating narrative that started with the theft and ended with a list of potential implications. I didn't call it revenge. I called it theft of a registered device with financial data at risk of exposure. When I finally hit send, I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline or satisfaction I thought would come. I felt calm, like finishing a long hike where the view isn't dramatic, but the air tastes better somehow. I closed the laptop, my borrowed one, a loaner from a client who had more empathy than my own family, and walked downstairs like it was any other Thursday. And for a few days, it was. Trey continued to gloat around the house, completely unaware of the storm already forming behind him. He bragged about a new vending machine location he was negotiating with a gas station manager who didn't even own the building. He talked about converting his room into a content studio for his motivational TikToks, even though he still hadn't hit 1,000 views on a single post. My mother, predictably, encouraged him, saying things like, "You've always been such a dreamer," while she gave me sideways glances as if I were the one bringing a storm into the house just by existing with a backbone. Then, on the 5th day after I submitted the report, I got the call. It came from a detective, Detective Hines, a man who sounded exhausted before he even said his name, the kind of man who had clearly seen enough stupidity in his line of work to be unimpressed by just about everything. He asked me a few follow-up questions, mostly about my identity and how I could verify ownership, which I did without hesitation. I explained the nature of my work, the sensitivity of the documents that were potentially compromised, and how I had attempted to resolve it privately but was met with denial and, frankly, indifference. I could tell he was reading along with the documents as I spoke, because every so often he would go quiet for just a beat too long, like he was absorbing the depth of how dumb this whole situation was. After I finished, he said, "We'll handle it from here." And just like that, it was out of my hands. I didn't know what day they'd show up or how it would unfold, and truthfully, I didn't care. That part wasn't mine anymore. It happened 2 days later on a Tuesday afternoon, sometime between lunch and whatever nonsense Trey had been planning to record that day. I was working quietly in the living room when I heard tires crunching on gravel outside, followed by the unmistakable heaviness of multiple car doors opening in near unison. I didn't move. I didn't stand to look. I just waited. Then came the knock, firm, authoritative, not a neighbor or delivery. The kind of knock that comes with badges. I heard Trey open the door, confusion in his voice as he said hello, and then silence. Not long, but long enough to know his mind was trying to catch up to what his eyes were seeing. Then came the murmur of voices, a request to step outside. Questions asked not with curiosity, but with confirmation. I heard my mother's voice rise slightly from the kitchen, surprise bleeding into panic as she asked what was going on. And Trey, now clearly alarmed, saying something about a mistake and he didn't know it was stolen. I didn't get up. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, sipping my tea, finally warm for once, and listened as the world shifted outside our door. They didn't arrest him on the spot, but they did take a statement. They asked to see his phone. They asked if he had any proof of ownership. They asked questions he couldn't answer, questions he hadn't prepared for, because in his mind, no one had the right to hold him accountable, not his sister, not the law, not reality. He stuttered, tried to laugh it off, insisted it was a family misunderstanding, but the problem was the report I submitted didn't read like a misunderstanding. It read like evidence. After they left, he stormed inside, flushed with embarrassment and fear that he tried to mask with anger. He demanded to know if I'd called the police, if I'd gone behind his back, as if I owed him a warning before reclaiming what he stole. My mother stood behind him, arms folded, her face a mix of disbelief and maternal protectiveness that made me wonder if she even saw the man standing in front of her anymore, or if she was still looking at the boy she remembered from a decade ago. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I told you it wasn't just a laptop." He opened his mouth like he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. Nothing useful, at least. The fallout started slowly. His job put him on unpaid leave while they reviewed his conduct, which was HR speak for, "We're deciding whether you're worth the paperwork." The laptop had pinged from inside the building, and while Corey, the buyer, wasn't charged since he had proof he purchased it in good faith, the company didn't like the implication that one of their employees brought stolen property into their secure environment. Suddenly, Trey's side hustle wasn't just a joke. It was a liability. He spent the next few days sulking, muttering about how I'd ruined everything, how family doesn't do that, and every time he said it, I had to resist the urge to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the irony of being called disloyal by the same man who stole my future and sold it for fast cash was just too much to process without some form of release. He thought I'd broken him, but the truth was, I didn't have to. All I did was let gravity do its job. When people talk about revenge, especially the kind that simmers beneath the surface, instead of exploding in a single glorious outburst, they often imagine it as something cold and calculated, like a chess game between equals or a dramatic confrontation that leaves the other person stunned into silence. But the truth is far less cinematic and far more hollow. What it actually feels like is standing in the aftermath of a storm you called down, watching the wreckage quietly, knowing you could have screamed or thrown things or begged to be heard, but instead chose a silence so sharp it sliced deeper than any words ever could. That was the feeling that followed me through the days, tries. After Trey's fragile little world began to crack under the weight of consequences he never imagined would find him, the same consequences I didn't create so much as uncover, like brushing dust off a trapdoor he never thought anyone would look under. He didn't lose everything all at once, of course, because life rarely delivers justice in one clean blow. Instead, it chips away in slow, humiliating increments, starting with the unpaid suspension from his job that, at first, he believed was just a procedural formality, the kind that would blow over once he explained that it was all a misunderstanding, that his sister was being emotional, that the laptop thing was a minor family issue blown out of proportion. But as the days dragged on, with no word from HR and the questions from his supervisor grew more pointed, asking why he'd used a work IP address to access flagged content, why his name was linked to social accounts involved in questionable transactions, and why a digital paper trail existed tying him to multiple false business invoices. He began to understand that this wasn't going away with a shrug and a smile. My mother, naturally, was livid, though not at him in the way one might expect a parent to react, when one child jeopardizes the future of another. Instead, her anger curled itself around the idea that I had somehow violated the sacred unspoken rule that family sticks together, that no matter how badly one of us screws up, we're supposed to protect each other from outsiders, even when the outsider in question is the law. She confronted me one evening, standing in the hallway just outside my bedroom, her voice low but sharp, as though she were trying to deliver a slap through carefully chosen words. "He's your brother, Lisa," she said, like I had forgotten. "You could have talked to us. You didn't have to go nuclear." And I remember looking at her, really looking at her, and seeing not my mother, not the woman who once taught me how to tie my shoes or held my hand during my first breakup, but someone who had long since decided that peace in this house was worth more than justice, especially if it meant keeping her golden child's ego intact. I didn't argue, I didn't yell, I just said, I talked, no one listened, and closed the door behind me. In the weeks that followed, Trey's descent became increasingly pitiful to watch, not because I felt sorry for him, but because of how utterly unprepared he was to face even the mildest form of real-world accountability. He spent hours online trying to scrub his profiles, delete posts, message friends to vouch for his character, and spin new narratives about being targeted or betrayed by someone he thought he could trust. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with someone, maybe one of his crypto friends, maybe just another gullible follower, saying that people don't appreciate visionaries until it's too late, as if the collapse of his carefully curated image wasn't due to his own arrogance and incompetence, but some sort of societal failure to recognize greatness. Meanwhile, I moved out. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't even something I announced. I quietly boxed up my things, filled my car with the essentials, and left without ceremony, leaving behind a house that had once felt like a place of return, and now felt more like a museum filled with the artifacts of denial. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe anyone that. I'd already spent years swallowing my discomfort, minimizing my boundaries, and biting my tongue in the name of being the bigger person. And now I was done playing the part they wrote for me in a story I never agreed to act out. A week after I left, I received a package at my new place. A slim, heavy box with no return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the label right away. Inside was a brand new MacBook Pro, nearly identical to the one I had lost. Except for a small detail, taped to the inside was a sticky note that read, "Heard you went full ninja, proud." It was from my old boss, someone I'd done contract work for years ago, someone who apparently heard the story through the industry grapevine and decided to reward not just my work ethic, but my refusal to be bullied into silence. That gesture, small as it was, hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the material gift, but because it reminded me that, outside of that house, people still believed in fairness, in respect, in earning your place rather than taking it through manipulation. As for Trey, the final blow came not from me, but from the same digital world he thought would make him rich. Someone he had mentored in a paid Telegram group, someone who felt scammed by his empty promises and shallow advice, dug into his digital trail and publicly posted screenshots of his fake invoices, his ghost business accounts, and the suspension notice from his employer, all neatly packaged in a Reddit thread titled, "Crypto Bro Sells Sister's Laptop, Ends Up Jobless and Broke." It went viral, of course. Internet justice is always faster when the villain writes his own script. I didn't share it, I didn't comment, I didn't even watch the views climb. I just closed the browser and got back to work. Because unlike Trey, I didn't need an audience to feel whole. Some nights, I think about what would have happened if I'd just let it go, if I'd listened to my mother, ignored the violation, swallowed the disrespect, and pretended it didn't matter. I think about how many times I've done exactly that over the years, convincing myself that staying silent was a form of strength, that being the bigger person meant disappearing so someone else could feel tall. But not this time. This time, I didn't scream or fight or destroy. I built a quiet path toward the truth, and then I walked it with my eyes open. He thought I was being petty, but no, I was being precise. And precision, as it turns out, cuts much deeper.